Yeah. Well, see.
I get Mark looking for clothes on this time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Who was it that got that email? Who was it that sent me the email about what to wear? Oh, it was you. It's a long story, but thank you for being dressed.
Yeah.
Probably something of note is that we have 50, and I spoke to Michael Yank the other day. I said, how many active distributors we have in send out cards? He said 53,000. This is number 3.
Wow. What do I say to a group of people like this? It's probably the biggest group I've ever spoken to. Huh? I did speak at convention. Who went to the convention where I got a little hot and didn't want to...
Were you undressed?
Yeah, so I just put my shorts on. Normally I don't dress up very nice. I usually wear sweats and that kind of stuff. I'm just glad to be here. I don't do a lot of traveling. Last few years I spend a lot of time with my family. When I do travel, I usually go with them. And it's my daughter's birthday tomorrow, and so we're going to get home early tomorrow. We're kicking off about 9, but I'm just excited to be here. How many of you are in Amway? That's what this is, isn't it? You know, 2 years ago, and a friend of mine, he's a multi-millionaire, he's Jack Bickmore. I was walking down the street with him. He owns about 29 Subway sandwich stores in Utah. And I go to lunch with him periodically. He's a really good friend of mine. And we're walking down, he's here and I'm here, we're walking down the sidewalk. And all of a sudden he just cuts in front of me, almost makes me trip and fall, and he picks up a penny on the floor. I mean on the ground. And I go, what'd you do that for? And he says, oh, I started picking up pennies. When I started picking up pennies, I became wealthy. And I says, what do you mean? And he says, oh, when I see a penny, I pick it up no matter where I'm at. And I go, where'd you heard that? Where'd you start doing that? Why'd you start doing that? He goes, oh, Steve Maycock, which is a friend of ours, he's very wealthy. He was a multi-millionaire when he was 26 years old. And he says, well, he taught me that. I said, what do you mean? He says, well, everywhere we go, he picks up pennies. I said, why do you do that? He says, when I started to do that, I became wealthy. And I said, what? And he says, yeah, you start picking that up, and then you start noticing things around you and stuff. And it's just a great way to do it. He says, when I started to listen to Steve, I became wealthy. So I started picking up pennies, and I become wealthy. Okay? Now, here's the interesting thing about picking up pennies. When you start noticing pennies on the ground, you all of a sudden see lots of them. I mean, tons of them. I mean, they're everywhere. You just have to start noticing them. Yeah, and yeah, absolutely. You can just go, you know what I'm talking about. They're everywhere. You start seeing them just everywhere. And then all of a sudden, guess what happens? You start to see quarters. And every once in a while, you'll see $1. One time I found a $100 bill on the side of the road. It was in some ice, and I had to chip it out. but what happens is that's what happens. And networking is network marketing is a lot like looking for pennies. When you start to look for them, you start to notice that they're everywhere. I mean, literally everywhere. You can go walk down this side, walk down the other, and you'll pick up some pennies. They're there. Now, a lot of people don't notice them because they're not looking. But when I started to do that, I started to notice. And then I started to take that analogy in my life, and I started to notice pennies everywhere. And that's how I do my business. And that's how I started to do my business. I just look for pennies. And sometimes they end up to be a quarter. Sometimes they're, I mean, I found an old 50-cent piece that was worth about $50. Okay, and then $1, $100, and that's kind of how I started to do with that, and that's how I do my business. And so, you know, all this business is about looking for pennies. And you'll find more as you start to do that. You start to notice. And so that's kind of how I started my business, and that's how I do it. When I first started, I don't know if any of you know my story, but I was a drunk at the Viaduct. No.
You look familiar.
Yeah. You used to give me your pennies.
Yeah. You used to steal them.